Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's a real spooky tale of possession when I put William Friedkin's The Exorcist against Rupert Wainwright's Stigmata. And this one, like I said, real spooky one to get through, so let's just dive right on in. First off, we have William Friedkin's The Exorcist, which, you know, everybody knows, very masterpiece of the cinema, you know, a staple of 70s horror. You know, it also features a solid cast. You know, of course, William Friedkin, one of the greatest directors of all time, especially at this period in time in the early 70s, you know, especially coming off of The French Connection, and written and produced by William Peter Blatty, who also wrote the novel the film is based off of. And essentially it centers around this young girl played by Linda Blair who gets possessed by the devil, you know, and of course, you know, being in a cynical society, you know, nobody really believes that it's demonic possession. It's all in the mind, you know, some kind of mental illness and stuff. So, you know, of course, and her mother, played by Ellen Burstyn, who is she's also a very, you know, well-known actress in film. And, you know, she's in DC shooting a film, and, you know, she's going through all these doctors to try to figure out, you know, what exactly is wrong with her daughter. And none of the doctors can come up with anything. I mean, you know, the girl's only puking green slime and, you know, poking herself with a crucifix, and, you know, it's all messed up and everything, but, you know, it's still, nobody wants to go that route. Also, there's parallel stories going on with a kind of a troubled priest played by Jason Miller, who kind of looks like a low rent Al Pacino, and, you know, he's dealing with stuff, you know, his dead mother and all that stuff. And then, of course, in the beginning we see Max von Sydow as a priest who's, you know, in a archaeological dig site in northern Iraq, and finds all these kind of demonic artifacts and stuff. And so somehow all this stuff comes together to do this whole exorcist thing, you know, because like I said, this isn't no ordinary possession. You know, the devil himself has a hold of this girl, and he ain't letting go. And in a way, the movie tells you exactly what it's going to do, though, because there's that scene where the Jason Miller's character, Father Karras, or not Damien, he's all interviewing Reagan, the little girl that's possessed by Satan, and trying to figure out, and Satan tells him, it's going to bring us closer together, this exorcism. And in a way it does, because, you know, spoiler alert, and if you haven't seen The Exorcist by now, definitely see it. And of course, any of these movies I do, watch the movies before you watch the video if you care about spoilers. But, you know, in the end, he ends up going through the exorcism with Max von Sydow's character, and it kills Max von Sydow, and so the priest himself says, go through me and take me. And then, you know, once Satan takes a hold of him, he jumps through the window and kills himself. And so in a way, it all kind of you know, but the thing that's beautiful about The Exorcist is that it's a film that has a hell of a buildup and a payoff that matches that buildup, you know, because that exorcism sequence is intense. Like, all of this stuff feels real, mainly because both William Friedkin, the director, and William Peter Blatty, the writer and producer of this material, fully believe in the material that they're making. They believe this stuff is real, you know, so they're not trying to disprove anything. They're not trying to poke fun at anything. They're showing you, like, their full belief structure and, you know, the insanity that goes along with it and stuff, you know, all that Catholic guilt and whatnot. But, and also too, like, everybody in the film is perfectly cast. Of course, Ellen Burstyn, one of the greatest actors of all time, like, she really, you know, it had an intensity, you know, usually playing a single mother in movies, especially in the 70s, you know. And Lee J. Cobb is perfect as the kind of the cynical police detective who's looking into, you know, there's, you know, a defacing of a church, and there's also the death of the director of the film that Ellen Burstyn's character is working on. And somehow he suspects something is going on, you know, even if he can't really put his finger on it. And that kind of just look of, you know, not knowing just what the hell just happened, you know, right after Damien jumps out the window and everything's kind of back the way it should be, you know, but it is definitely a shit show has just ensued, you know. But like I said, the special effects in this movie are on point. Like I said, everything in this movie feels real. There are some moments that may seem laughable, but, you know, they're not played for laughs. You know, it shows how fucked up the audience is that's watching it. You know, but it's like I said, a movie that definitely takes itself seriously and plays this like it was real. And, you know, even after over 50 years, this film still packs a punch to the point where it just sends chills down your spine. And the music itself is very creepy too, so it's just all around a perfect movie. And then we move forward to Stigmata, which instead of Satan this time, it's not necessarily God himself, but it's you got a priest at Alameda that dies at the beginning of the film. We see Gabriel Byrne's character, he's a priest, but he's also an investigator of all these incidents and stuff. And he sees this statue of the Virgin Mary that's crying blood tears, and it takes place at the funeral of this priest. And somehow this kid takes the rosary from the grave and then ends up selling it to this American tourist, who ends up sending it to her daughter, played by Patricia Arquette, who ends up being possessed by the spirit of Father Alameda, who has this secret that the Vatican has been trying to dispel and stuff. It's something to do with the actual words of Jesus Christ. It's like, the church it basically discredits the church, where it's like, Jesus Christ and God and all them lives inside of everybody. You don't need to go to church to feel that stuff. And, granted, it's going to be a hell of a toll on the racket that is the church. And so the main dude in charge, played by Jonathan Pryce, who's always exceptional at playing a prick, he sends Gabriel Byrne to go investigate, but then when all this stuff comes to light, he tries to silence it, but then Gabriel Byrne kind of ends up overcoming all this BS, and he finds the documents at the end, so in a way it all kind of works out and stuff. And the movie itself is very much kind of to try to over sexualize it in a way, because that's another beautiful thing about The Exorcist is it's not a sexy movie in any way, shape, or form. It's just told like to the most serious, gritty, and of course, coming from the man that made The French Connection, I wouldn't expect anything less. But here we have a director, Rupert Wainwright, who definitely feels more suited at doing music videos than actual films. And of course, Billy Corgan does the music for this one too, which I thought was very interesting, and the music's good and stuff. There are moments where it's like, you can't really, it's not really chilling. It doesn't pack that punch, And of course, she's got her Nia Long plays the friend in the movie, and of course, there's a lot of hot, women in the film. And, and of course you got your priest looks like Gabriel Byrne. So like, it's not like you got like Richard Burton or Max von Sydow in this shit. So it's like the movie itself and that was a trope of the 90s. Like everything was just like, everybody's all hot and sexy and everything. And so let's try to tempt the priest with sex and stuff. It was like, oh yeah, I wasn't born a priest type thing, and it's that kind of garbage. And so, but what's interesting too, is that this isn't like the devil didn't take possession of this girl. It's a priest who holds the secret to like what Jesus was trying to lay down on it, and the church doesn't want that to get out. So definitely a kind of shift, very much similar to The Omen versus Bless the Child, where it's like, the Antichrist in The Omen in the 70s, and then you got like the second coming of Jesus in the 90s, where they're trying to tempt it to be evil and all this stuff. But all in all, like the movie kind of wraps it up, and there is an alternate ending to it, which is much different, other than like they actually make it clear that she dies in the end, and kind of what's killing the messenger type thing. But all in all, like a lot of heavy-handed metaphors, and of course Patricia Arquette is a great actress, and Gabriel Byrne's no slouch himself, but they're not used as good as they could have been, because I've seen them do way better work in far better movies. So I mean, this round clearly has to go to The Exorcist. So I mean, the 70s were, when it came to horror films, the 70s, no holds barred. Like, they were real, they were gritty, and they left an indelible mark. There's a lot of stuff that Stigmata takes from The Exorcist, especially with the whole like possession stuff, and there's literally like stuff that's just you kind of see copied and paste, but still not done to that intensity that Friedkin achieved with The Exorcist. So 70s clearly get this round. For anybody keeping score, that's 39-31. 70s are up by 8. Man, they're kicking mucho ass. So who knows, the gap's only going to get bigger, or it could get smaller if the 90s come back, you know. But they kind of been throwing some trash lately, you know. And they did have, you know, not to say that Stigmata is a shit movie, it's just not a great movie, you know. And maybe a good movie, it's fun to watch, but in time, you know, that's kind of low energy in and of itself, you know. There's got the music, the industrial stuff going on, but, you know, and then like it doesn't really dive too deep into anything, you know. Like there's this big conspiracy going on, but then it's just explained all to Gabriel Byrne, and then he saves the day at the end. And then there's not really anything, you know, it's all style, no substance, so to speak, you know. And kind of an interesting concept, but like I said, doesn't live up to its full potential like The Exorcist does. Like, I mean, the build-up and the payoff, there's very few movies that achieve a really good build-up and an exceptional payoff, you know. It's like, so 39 to 31, 70's up by 8. If I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. This is a rough draft to a doctoral thesis that's become a scientific obsession to see which decade is better, you know. And of course, it's spooky season, so you're going to see a lot more horror films this month. And of course, a few other bonus rounds. The next main event is going to be the Texas Chainsaw Massacre versus the Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation. So that one should be really intense. And like I said, the summer's over, but this shit's only heating up.